They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when that blood feels like poison running through your family's veins? My name is Cora, and for 25 years I lived in the shadow of perfection. While my sister Madison dazzled everyone with her charm and achievements, I was labeled the family disappointment. I accepted this role believing I deserved it until my wedding day revealed a truth so devastating it shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button if you can relate to feeling overlooked in your family, and do not forget to subscribe for more real-life stories. You will not believe how this tale unfolds, so let us get started. Growing up in suburban Denver, our house was like a shrine to Madison's accomplishments. Golden trophies lined the mantelpiece, academic awards covered the refrigerator, and her honor roll certificates created a paper trail of excellence down the hallway. I was 3 years younger, and from the moment I could understand language, I understood my place in the family hierarchy. Madison was everything our parents wanted in a daughter. She excelled in everything she touched. Straight a student captain of the debate team, star of the school musical, and somehow managed to volunteer at the animal shelter every weekend. She had this way of lighting up a room when she entered, her blonde hair always perfectly styled, her smile practiced and warm. Everyone loved Madison. Then there was me. Average grades, average looks, average everything. I tried out for the same activities Madison excelled in, but I always fell short. When I joined the debate team, I stuttered during my first competition. When I auditioned for the school play, I forgot my lines. When I tried volleyball, I could not serve over the net to save my life. My parents attended every event, but I could see the disappointment in their eyes as they compared my mediocre performance to their golden child's brilliance. The comparison started early and never stopped. At dinner, Madison would share stories about her day, academic achievements, or social victories, while I sat quietly picking at my food. When relatives visited, they would gush over Madison's latest accomplishment, and then turn to me with that forced smile asking, "And how are you doing in school, sweetie?" in a tone that suggested they expected nothing noteworthy. My bedroom was next to Madison's, and the contrast was striking. Her room was immaculate, filled with trophies, certificates, and photos of her with friends at various events. My room felt empty in comparison, decorated with participation ribbons and a few books I actually enjoyed reading. The walls seemed to echo the disappointment that followed me everywhere. School became a daily reminder of my inadequacy. Teachers knew Madison, remembered her, praised her years after she had moved on to the next grade. When they met me, I could see them searching for similarities, hoping I would be another Madison Williams. The disappointment on their faces when they realized I was just ordinary, Cora was becoming familiar. My parents tried to hide their favoritism, but children notice everything. Madison got the bigger bedroom, the newer clothes, the latest gadgets. When she wanted to take piano lessons, they bought a brand new upright piano. When I expressed interest in art, they handed me a $20 set of colored pencils from the drugstore. Madison's birthday parties were elaborate affairs with themes and decorations. Mine were simple cake and ice cream gatherings with immediate family. The worst part was how kind Madison appeared to everyone else. She would defend me when other kids teased me, help me with homework, and include me in some of her activities. But there were moments, brief glimpses, when no one else was watching, where I caught something different in her expression. A flash of satisfaction when I failed at something, a smirk when our parents praised her and ignored me. But these moments were so quick, so subtle, that I convinced myself I was imagining them. By high school, I had accepted my role as the disappointing daughter. I stopped trying to compete with Madison and instead focused on just getting by. I worked part-time at a local bookstore, saved my money, and dreamed of the day I could move away and start fresh somewhere nobody knew about my perfect sister. College was supposed to be my escape, but Madison's shadow followed me even there. She had attended the same state university 2 years ahead of me, graduating summa cum laude with a degree in business administration. When I enrolled, professors would light up upon hearing my last name, expecting another Williams success story. Their disappointment became routine when they realized I was just average Cora, struggling to maintain a B- average in communications. Madison had moved to Chicago after graduation, landing what our parents described as a dream job at a prestigious marketing firm. She rented a beautiful apartment in Lincoln Park, drove a sleek BMW, and her Instagram feed looked like a lifestyle magazine. Meanwhile, I shared a cramped apartment with 2 roommates, worked weekends at a coffee shop to pay rent, and drove a beat-up Honda that broke down monthly. Family gatherings became increasingly painful. Madison would visit for holidays, regaling everyone with stories about her glamorous life, important clients, and exciting business trips. She dated successful men who wore expensive suits and had impressive job titles. When it was my turn to share updates, I had little to offer beyond my classes and part-time work. The pattern continued after graduation. Madison received a promotion and moved to an even better apartment. She started dating Derek, an investment banker who seemed straight out of a romantic comedy. They took exotic vacations, attended charity galas, and lived the life I had only seen in movies. Meanwhile, I moved back home temporarily, working at the local newspaper for barely above minimum wage, trying to save enough to move out again. Everything changed when I met James during my final year of college. He was different from anyone I had ever dated. A graduate student in environmental science, he was passionate about conservation and spent his free time hiking and volunteering for cleanup projects. James saw something in me that others missed. He appreciated my writing, encouraged my creativity, and made me feel valued for who I was, rather than disappointed about who I was not. Our relationship developed slowly and genuinely. James never made me feel inadequate or compared me to anyone else. He celebrated my small victories and supported me through setbacks. When I introduced him to my family, I watched nervously as they sized him up. He was not as polished as Derek, did not drive an expensive car, and worked for a non-profit environmental organization. I could see my parents struggling to hide their disappointment that I had not landed someone more impressive. Madison was particularly dismissive of James. She made subtle comments about his career choice, questioning the stability of nonprofit work. She would joke about his granola lifestyle and suggest that I should aim higher. But James handled her criticism with grace, never rising to her bait or showing any irritation. When James proposed during a camping trip in Rocky Mountain National Park, I was overwhelmed with happiness. The ring was simple but beautiful, and his proposal was heartfelt and genuine. When we announced our engagement to my family, Madison immediately began comparing it to Derek's elaborate proposal at a 5-star restaurant in Paris. She offered to help plan the wedding, suggesting expensive venues and elaborate themes that were far beyond our budget. James and I wanted something small and meaningful. We chose a beautiful outdoor venue in the mountains, planned a menu of comfort food rather than fancy cuisine, and invited only close family and friends. Madison criticized every decision, suggesting that I was settling for less than I deserved. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was making choices that truly reflected who I was, rather than trying to live up to impossible expectations. The guest list became a source of tension. Madison insisted on inviting some of her Chicago friends, people I barely knew, claiming they would add sophistication to the event. She also pushed to include some business contacts who might be useful connections for James and me. I finally put my foot down, explaining that this was our wedding, not a networking opportunity. As the wedding date approached, Madison's behavior became increasingly strange. She offered to handle various aspects of the planning, then would make changes without consulting me. She booked a different photographer, claiming the one I chose was not professional enough. She tried to change the flower arrangements to something more expensive and elaborate. Each time I had to politely but firmly reverse her decisions, creating more tension between us. The morning of my wedding day started with unexpected drama. I was getting ready in the bridal suite at our mountain venue when my phone buzzed with a text from Derek, Madison's fiance. The message was brief but earth-shattering. "We need to talk before the ceremony. It is about Madison. Meet me by the gazebo in 10 minutes. Please do not tell her." My hands shook as I read the message again. Derek had always been polite but distant with me, so this urgent request felt completely out of character. I made an excuse to my bridesmaids about needing fresh air and slipped out to meet him. I found Derek pacing near the gazebo, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. His tie was crooked, his hair messy, and he looked like he had not slept in days. When he saw me approaching in my wedding dress, his expression crumbled with what looked like shame and regret. "Cora, I am so sorry to do this today, but I cannot keep lying anymore. He began, his voice shaking. I need to tell you something about Madison, and I do not know how else to say this except directly. My heart was pounding as I waited for him to continue. Derek took a deep breath and looked directly into my eyes. Madison has been stealing money from her company for over 2 years. The FBI contacted me last week because they are building a case against her. She has been using my name and our relationship to cover up some of her activities. The words hit me like a physical blow. Perfect Madison, the golden child, was a criminal. Derek continued explaining that Madison had been embezzling funds through fake vendor accounts, using her position as a senior account manager to authorize payments to companies that did not exist. She had stolen nearly $200,000 over 2 years. But that is not all, Derek said, his voice barely above a whisper. She has been lying about our relationship too. We broke up 6 months ago when I discovered some of her illegal activities, but she begged me to keep pretending we were together until she could figure out how to fix things. She said it would look suspicious if we suddenly broke up while she was under investigation. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Everything I had believed about my sister's perfect life was a lie. Derek explained that Madison's beautiful apartment was rented with stolen money. Her expensive car was leased under a fake business account, and even some of her designer clothes were purchased with embezzled funds. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice barely steady. Derek's expression grew even more pained. Because she is planning to pin some of this on James. She has been asking me questions about his environmental organization, claiming she wants to make a donation. But I think she is trying to set up some kind of money trail that leads to him instead of her. I cannot let her destroy your marriage before it even begins. The realization that Madison would try to frame my husband-to-be for her crimes was devastating. All those years of feeling inadequate compared to her success, and it was all built on lies and theft. Derek handed me a manila envelope containing copies of documents and email conversations between him and Madison about her illegal activities. I should have reported this months ago, but I was scared of getting dragged into her mess, Derek admitted. But seeing you today starting your life with someone who genuinely loves you, I realized I could not let her hurt you anymore. I stood there in my wedding dress, holding evidence that would destroy my sister's life and reputation. Part of me felt vindicated after years of being treated as the family disappointment, but mostly I just felt sad. Sad for the sister I thought I knew. Sad for the family dynamics that had pushed her to these extremes, and sad that this moment of truth was happening on what should have been the happiest day of my life. Derek promised to turn over all his evidence to the authorities after my wedding, giving me a few hours to process this information before everything exploded. As I walked back to the bridal suite, my mind was racing with questions about how to handle this revelation and whether to tell James before the ceremony. I decided to wait until after the ceremony to tell James about Madison's crimes. This was our wedding day, and I refused to let her destructive choices overshadow the beginning of our marriage. But as I walked down the aisle toward James, looking radiant in his rented tuxedo with tears of joy in his eyes, I felt a new sense of strength and purpose. The ceremony was beautiful and intimate, exactly what James and I had envisioned. As we exchanged vows, promising to support each other through whatever challenges life brought, I felt the weight of Madison's secrets heavy on my heart, but also a newfound clarity about my own worth. For the first time in my life, I was not the disappointing daughter standing in someone else's shadow. During the reception, Madison gave a maid of honor speech that now seemed surreal in light of what I knew. She talked about my journey of growth and how proud she was that I had finally found my path. Her words, which would have stung hours earlier, now seemed hollow and desperate. I watched her smile and charm the guests, knowing that behind her perfect facade was a woman whose life was about to collapse. After the reception, James and I retreated to our honeymoon suite, where I finally told him everything Derek had revealed. James listened without interruption, his expressions cycling through shock, anger, and finally protective determination. Instead of being angry that I had waited to tell him, he thanked me for not letting Madison's crisis overshadow our wedding day. "What do you want to do?" he asked, holding my hands in his. I thought about all the years I had spent feeling inadequate, all the times I had questioned my own worth, because I could not measure up to Madison's seemingly perfect life. Now I knew that perfection had been built on lies and theft. But rather than feeling vindictive, I felt something unexpected pity for my sister and relief for myself. I want to tell my parents first before they hear it from the authorities. I decided. They deserve to know the truth, even if it breaks their hearts. The conversation with my parents the next morning was one of the most difficult I had ever experienced. I showed them Derek's evidence and watched their faces as they processed the reality of their golden child's criminal behavior. My father sat in stunned silence while my mother wept, alternating between disbelief and desperate attempts to find explanations that would make this less serious than it was. "Maybe it is just a misunderstanding," my mother kept repeating. "Madison would never do something like this intentionally." But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements, email trails, fake invoices, everything painted a clear picture of deliberate and sustained theft. My parents' worldview was crumbling as they realized that everything they had celebrated about Madison's success was built on criminal activity. 3 days after my wedding, the FBI arrested Madison at her office. The story made the local news, describing her as a trusted employee who exploited her position for personal gain. The contrast between the Madison in the news reports wearing handcuffs and hiding from cameras and the Madison who had given speeches about integrity and hard work at family dinners was jarring. The investigation revealed even more disturbing details. Madison had not only stolen money, but had also falsified client reports and lied to her supervisors about project outcomes. She had created an elaborate web of deception that went far beyond simple theft. The Madison I thought I knew had never really existed. My parents struggled to reconcile their image of their perfect daughter with the reality of her crimes. They hired expensive lawyers and mortgaged their house to pay for her defense, still clinging to hope that somehow this was all a mistake. But I had moved beyond denial into acceptance of who my sister really was. The hardest part was not the revelation of Madison's crimes, but the realization of how her deception had shaped my entire sense of self-worth. I had spent 25 years believing I was inadequate compared to her success, when in reality, I was the one living authentically and honestly. The healing process was slower than I expected, but with James's support and some counseling, I began to understand how deeply Madison's false perfection had affected my self-esteem. I started to see my own accomplishments, modest as they seemed compared to her fabricated success, as genuine achievements worth celebrating. My relationship with my parents gradually improved as they worked through their own guilt and disappointment. They began to recognize how their favoritism had hurt me and made efforts to rebuild our connection based on who I actually was, rather than how I compared to Madison. It was not easy, and there were setbacks, but for the first time in my adult life, I felt seen and valued by my family. Madison was eventually sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution. She sent me a letter from jail, a rambling apology that blamed everyone except herself for her choices. She claimed she had felt pressure to maintain her perfect image and that stealing had started small before spiraling out of control. But she never acknowledged how her lies had hurt me or took responsibility for the years of false superiority she had lorded over our family. James and I built a quiet, honest life together. He got a promotion at his environmental organization, and I finally found my voice as a freelance writer specializing in stories about family dynamics and personal growth. We bought a modest house with a garden where James grows vegetables, and I have a small writing studio. Our life looks nothing like Madison's fabricated perfection, but it is real, sustainable, and genuinely ours. The most important lesson I learned from this experience was that authentic living, even when it appears ordinary or disappointing to others, is infinitely more valuable than a perfect facade built on lies. I stopped measuring my worth against other people's achievements and started appreciating my own journey, mistakes, and all. Sometimes people ask if I feel vindicated, knowing that Madison's perfect life was a lie. The honest answer is that vindication was not what healed me. What healed me was finally understanding that I had never been the disappointing daughter. I had been the honest one, the authentic one, the one who did not need to steal or lie to feel worthy of love. Today, when I visit my parents, the mantelpiece displays photos from my wedding alongside James's environmental awards and articles I have published. There are no more shrines to false perfection, just honest celebrations of real accomplishments and genuine relationships. The house feels different now, warmer somehow, without the weight of maintaining impossible standards. I think about Madison, sometimes wondering if prison gave her time to reflect on the choices that led to her downfall. I hope she finds a way to build an authentic life when she is released, one based on truth, rather than the exhausting performance of perfection she maintained for so many years. The truth about family dynamics I have learned is that there are no golden children and no disappointing daughters. There are just people making choices, some honest and some destructive, all trying to find their place in the world. The measure of a life well lived is not in trophies or bank accounts or perfect Instagram feeds, but in the courage to be genuinely yourself, even when that self seems ordinary by comparison to others. What about you? Have you ever felt overshadowed by a sibling or family member who seemed to have it all together? How did you find your own sense of worth? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and finding your authentic self. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that being genuine is more valuable than being perfect. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth is not determined by how you compare to others, but by the authenticity and kindness you bring to the world.